It's Monday afternoon on the remarkably multicultural campus of Ryerson University in downtown Toronto. A lot of these students are new immigrants or second generation. Others belong to the big city's dwindling white population. But their bond is their Canadianism, a shared patriotic cockiness bordering on smug, if polling data is to be believed. Even the newest arrivals seem to have internalized that to be Canadian is to somehow live on a higher moral plane, especially with regard to certain others.
We can think about national identity as having
those others are the subject of Tracy Rainey's Canadian Studies class today.
We need to build up a national identity. On average, Canadians are more likely to say that they would rather be a citizen of Canada than any other country, that the world would be a better place if more citizens were like Canadians were, that we are, in some respects, superior to Americans.
To her students, though, in some respects, barely begins to express it. Rainey tests the question.
Generally speaking, Canada is better than the United States. Could we see a show of hands who would agree with that? Okay. Versus a show of hands, keep your hands up in the air. Okay, so generally speaking, Canada is a better country than the United States. Keep your hands up in the air. And then let me change the question and go back. Generally speaking, Canada is a better country than most countries. Okay, so there's something particularly about the United States.
Indeed there is, where these young people are concerned. Listen to some of these opinions.
Keep it short, give me a couple of words.
Americans are pompous.
I think they're ignorant. I think Americans are addicted to war.
Discriminatory.
Just about no one had a positive word.
They're like frenemies. They're friends and enemies at the same time.
Pushy.
They are a little bit power hungry.
Arrogant is the first word that comes to mind when I think of Americans.
Of course, it's nothing new that Canadians describe themselves first and foremost as not Americans. But as Canadian self-confidence grows, and pollsters say it is most definitely growing, the old knee-jerk anti-Americanism, the resentment born principally of Canadian insecurity, seems to have morphed into something else, a supercilious conviction of moral superiority. Just read the online postings at the end of columns about America in Canadian news websites. A few recent excerpts from the CBC site. American politicians preaching complete gobbledygook under the guise of nauseating American patriotism and belief in God is pathetic. That drew 273 thumbs-up approvals from readers. Or, the United States is the most backward country in the developed world. 240 thumbs up. Or, the collective citizens of the U.S. are as dumb as bricks. And so on. Pollster Michael Adams has studied such attitudes in depth.
Well, 5 years ago, Neil, I would have said we would feel morally superior. We're the kinder, gentler society. We're multicultural. We have health care.
Again, let's Sidney Crosby, the golden goal!
But now, says Adams, it's something more.
Olympic gold!
Canada's celebration of Olympic victories over Americans verged on jingoism. And the mission in Afghanistan, says Adams, has Canadians feeling they are pound for pound better war fighters than the Americans too. Oh, and unlike them, we can mock ourselves.
We're confident enough to make fun of ourselves, and in that sense we feel superior because we then are even more ironic. It's like being the smart kid who feels smarter than her little brother who doesn't get it. Well, we feel like the smart older sister who gets it.
Talking to America!
Nothing distills that notion like Rick Mercer's famous Talking to Americans skits. Essentially, Mercer exploits the American eagerness to engage with strangers, no matter how silly the topic.
I had no idea that Canada was on a 20-hour clock.
But it's actually the same amount of time, but just our minutes are longer.
Okay.
By American standards.
Well, I think it should be switched.
Yeah.
Canada, please move to the 24-hour clock.
Hi, I'm Governor Tom Vilsack from Iowa. Canada, congratulations on your new 24-hour clock.
There are differences of perspective.
Gordon Giffen has heard it all. When he was the American ambassador to Canada and traveled the country from one end to the other, one theme stood out.
As a country, as a people, Canadians were more generous, more thoughtful, more caring, more courteous and more global in their perspective than Americans, and then usually they'd conclude by telling me that Canadians were also more modest than Americans. And I found a little irony in that, but
they did.
Not particularly.
Giffen also heard a lot of this.
I think of them as selfish just because they don't take the same time that we do to learn about them as they do us.
As I traveled Canada, I'd get a lot of people who would say, well, we know everything about you, you know nothing about us. And I'd say, well, tell me everything you know about Kansas. And people's eyes would glaze over, or, you know, Nebraska or Arkansas.
Here's a few other things Canadians don't know about Americans. They give more to charity than any other nation, and far more per capita than Canadians do. Americans work harder and more productively than Canadians. They send more aid abroad, even on a per capita basis, than anyone else. And where Canadians are concerned, while Americans might not have studied the nation to their north, they seldom have a mean word to say.
In our darkest hours, Canada has been with us.
NBC's Tom Brokaw broadcast an essay about Canada during the Olympics.
Jesse the Sponge. Canadians are so generous, they share with us their brightest stars in music, comedy, acting, sports, and journalism.
And here was the result when we took a paper and pen down to DuPont Circle here in DC. We simply asked people to write down one word about Canada. Neil Macdonald, CBC News, Washington.